Hello and welcome to another episode of Change One Thing, the show where we explore if tomorrow will really be what tomorrow will be. Hi there, it's Larni and we're back for another episode. This week, my guest is Dr. Michael Fielding, the Principal Research and Development Fellow in Advanced Mechatronics Systems at Deakin University's Institute for Intelligent Systems Research and Innovation. Mick is a robotics engineer and inventor with 20 years experience conceiving, testing, commissioning and supporting complex systems in a variety of real-world applications. His work mixes cutting-edge technology with a practical approach and has been used by military, law enforcement and counter-terrorism units in training and in the field. Mick is committed to developing technology that responds to the needs of the end user, and that drive takes him to some weird and wonderful locations. I really enjoyed my time with Mick and I'm amazed at the work he's produced. So here we go again, Change One Thing with Dr. Michael Fielding. Is robotics something you always wanted to work in from a young age?
Certainly technology of some form or another. Robotics specifically, I probably didn't put that finer point on it so early on, but naturally grew toward that over the years of study and then through my career as well.
Yeah. Were your parents sort of interested in sciencey type things? Were they scientists themselves or?
Parents were both teachers.
Yep.
And they grew up in Melbourne and then once they finished university, took a role in the country. So there was good incentives to move to the country and teach. So they took a 3-year contract and then that turned into 3 decades. So myself and my siblings spent the sort of start of our lives all growing up in the country surrounded by dairy farms and it was nice.
Country boy then.
Yep. Yeah, I guess so.
That's good experience.
And certainly my parents mentioned they're teachers, but they also taught sciences and maths and physics and so forth. And my grandfather especially had a keen interest in electronics and a chemistry background. And so a lot of the time when I was learning things from my parents or grandparents, my grandfather in particular, that would have been in the field of engineering or science or something around that.
Yeah, so it's a little bit in the DNA, and I've pulled this quote from your bio, Mick, and it goes like this. Mick particularly enjoys mixing cutting-edge technology and good old Aussie ingenuity to replace problems people have with solutions they love. When I was reading this, my immediate thought was, this guy is actually MacGyver.
Almost, not quite. I'd like... How do I respond to that?
I think you'd be very handy to have around when things sort of go wrong.
Yeah, it's certainly the idea of Macgyvering a solution comes up on nearly the daily basis. But that when presented with a problem or a situation, like whether it's with work or something out camping or wherever it may be, and there's a particular outcome that needs to be achieved, and you're aware of what the outcome is, my mind really just goes into a mode of that's where we need to end up, and not achieving that is not an option. And so then brain just goes into lateral thinking overload and looking at how can we repurpose something, how can you put something together which may not be obvious, but it gets you where you need to go. And that's always been a fun, something I enjoy. But specifically, I guess, around the quote in the bio, the technology for technology's sake is not something that I'm passionate about. Clever solutions, clever use of technology that I really enjoy, and certainly taking into consideration the user experience, the how is someone going to use something, why are they going to use it, why are they going to use it in that particular way, and how else may they use it. And trying to get in that mindset, and that's often done through with close collaboration with end users, but understanding what the challenges are and using the knowledge that I have and also the knowledge of the broader team that I work with to collectively come up with a solution, which is not only solving the problem, but it's also really enjoyable to have, developing a solution that someone, if you take it away from them, gets disappointed with is a big motivator.
So, Mick, you mentioned user experience and a collaborative approach. I'm guessing you use design thinking methodology in your approach to your work.
We do, and it really depends, I guess, as to what stage we are along in the process. Certainly early on, getting an understanding of what the real challenges are being faced by end users is an important part of it. But in the early days, also just testing different theories, technologies, possible solutions to see if they're even possible, like if it's practical, if it works mechanically, electronically, from whatever perspective, is an important part of the early stages. And then throughout the process, the spiral iteration where we design something, it might look like a total hack job, but it gets us in front of the end users and says, and it's something to evaluate, something to test, something for them to start providing feedback on. So in my experience, if you ask someone with a blank canvas, say, what do you want? It can be quite a challenge to solicit that feedback, or those diamonds, I guess, in terms of what they're looking for. But if you put something in front of someone and say, is this what you're after? Very quickly they can come back to you with all the things that are wrong with it. No, it can't be like this, it can't be like that. It needs to be a different material, it needs to be a different size, a different weight, or whatever it might be. And that is a really important process. So not looking at arriving at the final polished solution and saying, here is what you asked for. That's really a case of working with the end users and iterating with their feedback as closely as possible, in a way which is hopefully getting you toward the end point, and not pivoting too much, or at least zigging and zagging too much in terms of what you're trying to achieve. If you're doing that too much down the process, I'd suggest that perhaps you haven't had enough consultation to begin with in the first place. But that regular feedback, talking about what you've done, showing what you've done, and talking about what you're intending to do and why, really is an important part in understanding the problem.
So you're really sort of involving the user in the process of making or inventing the end result, basically. Definitely
having them involved in the process, whether it's the coming up with the invention, or whether it's just really well articulating or sharing with us, what is it that they don't like about the current way they do things, or what is it that needs to change. Sometimes asking someone what they think the solution is a less valuable question than asking what the problem is. They're both important, and certainly understanding the insights or interrogating the solutions that people have come up with to say, well, why have you gone down that path?
That's a great way of looking at something, isn't it? It's sort of a little bit of a backwards way to how it may have been done, but something that is probably becoming a lot more popular with the way that, things are evolving so fast, especially with technology. What do they really need as opposed to what do we think they need?
Yep.
Michael, you're named inventor on 7 international patents. Can you tell us a bit about these inventions?
I guess although yes, I am a named inventor on a number of them, it's certainly been a team effort for the development of the majority of the IP or the technologies that are listed in there. And I think, again, having a team of really capable individuals working together is naturally good ideas are going to come from that. And I guess, that's really reflected in the number of patents that I've been named on up until now. But again, I'm one name among many as well.
And with something that does have a big team working together, what's that look like? Like, what's your workspace look like? Is it a big shed? Is it like, are you all just standing around sort of like, or are you doing different things? What does that look like?
So the space itself, I guess, reflects these days reflects the project quite specifically. In the past, we've had sort of had access to more of a general build space where we have all of our electronics work, all of our mechanical work, all of these facilities in one place, and you kind of bring an idea to that place, and then a solution or something to test comes out of it. These days, it's a lot more specific. There's a particular project that I'm working on at the moment where the space that we have is built for that project, and really nothing much beyond that. That being said, there's a new facility being built by Deakin at the moment on campus for the institute that I'm a part of, ISRI, and that will once again really rebuild this idea of a one-stop solution creation. I call it ISRI land, just because of the wonderment that happens there. But it's really having all those facilities and individuals as well. All the folks in the team nearby, it means that you can do things really quickly and often be pretty close to the mark.
And is there any sort of people standing around in lab coats, or are we talking more like?
Yeah, it really depends on what we're doing as to what we're wearing. So, today I'm in jeans and a t-shirt and steel cap boots, but other times it's the suit and tie. So it really comes down to what the job is for that day. If we're on the tools, building something, there's no point having it. It's dangerous having a tie hanging out. But definitely lab coats, definitely safety glasses, definitely all the PP&E, which I guess is traditionally what you might imagine when you're thinking about a scientist.
Can you tell us, in terms of inventions, how do you keep your brain fresh, Mick? So do you have any little tips and tricks for our listeners out there, or possible inventors out there? What do you do? Do you have any little rituals? Do you do you eat avocados every day? Do you have green smoothies? What do you do?
What do I do? Just being fascinated by stuff, not because it's necessarily in your area, but it just to grow the mind. Certainly I take any opportunity to watch or hear or see anyone who's really good at what they do. I figure if you're going to learn something, you may as well learn from the people who are the best in their field, and you can learn a lot of tips and tricks from that, and then really carry those ideas or those concepts around with you. And when opportunities present, it might be the intersection of four things from completely different fields which all come together, and you're like, hey, I think there might be a better way of doing that.
For anyone listening out there that might want to get into inventing or go down the path that you've gone down, what's your advice to them?
Have a crack.
There you go, guys. Have a crack.
Certainly don't look at getting it wrong as failure. That's a step in the process, and really for anyone who's had a great idea, I'd really recommend, and they want to try and find a market for it, or want to try and sell the idea as a concept to someone else. Do your homework. Taking that approach of if I was going to commercialize this, would it be successful, and what can I do to ensure that, and understanding what the competition is, understanding what the market is, understanding the standard SWOT analysis type approach really gives you a lot of insight. And even if it's just an idea, it could be a simple idea, run through that process to convince yourself either it's a good idea or a bad idea, or identify the areas that maybe you need to do a bit more investigation before releasing that fantastic idea to the market.
Now I want to get into using robotics for real world problems. Michael, you helped with a mine emergency 860 metres below surface. When was this, and did you use any robots during the rescue?
Yeah, so this was a story from last year where there was a mining company who showed some interest in robotics, and I was actually out on a site with Army at the time testing one of our systems, and I thought, we'll get back to them once I'm back at the office. And the next day they're like, I think after 3 phone calls, we thought, all right, there's something that's a little bit urgent. And it turned out there was a situation where there were no lives at risk. However, there was an opportunity to respond to that situation using something like a robot. And they were doing a bit of a shout out to see who's active, or to those who are active in robotics in Australia, to see if we could assist. And so ultimately, with I'd say a tighter than usual turnaround within about 48 hours. We had a solution, a robotic system, one of our existing robots, which was modified to what we thought addressed the problem as it was, and myself over on a plane in Western Australia. And so one of my good colleagues, James Mullins, was and supported by others, put together a solution in the lab back on campus, overnight flight, or dispatched that across to WA, and then I rendezvoused with the robot there, seeing it for the first time, but also having been involved with some of the design decisions, but then having to actually go down
so
into the mine.
you and the robot flew over on different flights.
We did.
And you met for the first time at the mine.
Yeah, so the robot, when I first saw it, was very familiar to me, other than the angle grinder, which had been strapped on top of it. And that was I'd seen a video of it running, which looked like something out of Robot Wars, but ultimately it had to cut a pipe, and we thought that might be maybe somewhat agricultural, but nevertheless an effective way of doing that.
And did it have a name, that particular robot?
No, it didn't.
Oh.
I kind of wish we did now.
Now, Mick, you've helped develop Radar, a combined arms live fire target system. Can you explain what this is and how it works?
Sure. So the Radar system is a mobile moving target system, which is designed to be engaged during live fire training, and so essentially provides a moving target on which soldiers can train their fire. And that's although there have been a number of moving targets developed over the years, the way that Radar does what it does and the simplicity of how it can be moved from one location to the other is something which hasn't been achieved to this level before.
So when you're saying from one location to another, you mean like over different kinds of terrain, or? Yep.
So Radar, it's compatible with lightly prepared surfaces, so it wouldn't go rock hopping, so to speak, but certainly on the sorts of terrain you'd find across ranges in the country, it's very much suited to. And a number of the moving target systems that are available today are fixed or based on fixed infrastructure. So where they were installed sometimes decades ago is where they stay today. And although they provide a good training outcome, it limits the amount of variability that trainees or trainers can design into the serials that they're using to train the soldiers on.
Do you get to go into, sort of speaking of the Defence Force, into these army bases and trial some of these robotic targets?
Yeah, definitely, and that's really an important part of one, testing the system in a real life environment, but also having access to the stakeholders to provide feedback. Certainly, individuals providing feedback is extremely important, but having teams of people provide feedback, often supported by one another as well, is really important.
You obviously spend a little bit of time on army bases. I imagine there's quite a comparison going from, say, the research lab to the military base. How do you find that?
Yeah, there's certainly a big contrast, going from a nice air-conditioned office to the middle of Australia sometimes with our systems.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. I like being out and about, and it's often a lot of what we do is behind closed doors. So to be out in the field and seeing, really seeing what you've been doing behind the scenes in the labs, out there in the wild, working as you might have hoped, or really when end users come up and give you a pat on the back or have a smile on their face saying like, this is awesome. Like, there's not much better experience than that.
This episode is presented by Deakin University. You can find all of the show notes and other great content related to this chat at disruptor.deakin.edu.au or find us on socials at Deakin Research. So Michael, what's it like to be a part of a startup. How's this process been for you, and what have you learned from being a part of that side to Inventions?
Yeah, it's been quite an experience, and really continues to be. For the majority of my career to date, it's been conceiving and testing and developing ideas, and up to a certain point at which time you either hand the idea across elsewhere, or you're moving your attention to a different area of research because the project's concluded. And this has really been an experience of not stopping at any particular point and just going and going and going. And the transition from making something which is works in the lab to something which can be tested in field, which to something which can actually operate in the field, is each of those steps are, it's simple to run them off one after the other, but to actually develop the technology and the different different challenges that need to be overcome for each of those steps can be a monstrous task.
Yeah.
And so the process of probably the biggest things that I've learned along the way would be, certainly if you're not sure about something, ask. For everything that you're good at, there's going to be 1,000 people who are better at something else, and that might be a skill set that you require. So rather than, it's important to understand the questions you're asking, but you don't necessarily have to be the one with all the answers. And that's where working in a team environment and working with your friends, your network around the world, and soliciting their advice and feedback whenever you can is an important part of achieving a good outcome at the end.
Tell us about the remote control Ozbots you've worked on for things like bomb response units and police negotiations.
So the Ozbot family of robots was all started in the mid-2000s when we developed a robot for the Commonwealth Games, and that was essentially designed to inspect under seats in stadiums for devices or objects that shouldn't be there. And over the years, that was developed further to a fleet of robots that we have now, which are used actively in domestic law enforcement and other tasks. And really, there's a number of systems which are developed for different unique tasks as well. From quite a small robot, which is remote eyes and ears, which would allow someone in what's called a first responder capacity to arrive on a site and do an initial survey of the area to understand any hazards that might be there. Some of the mid-level robots give you more capacity in order to climb stairs or maybe navigate some harsher terrain, all the way up to our largest robots, which can literally bash through doors and create holes where they weren't intended to be. And there's some quite specific use cases where they're quite valuable, and the people who need those have those available to them.
So they're making they're making it safer for our first responders, I guess. Do you have any sort of particular stories or examples where these Ozbots have been used and been sort of highly beneficial?
One of the stories I enjoy hearing the most is about one of the tracked platforms, Ozbot Mark 8, which was sent into a siege. It has a microphone and speaker, and it was sent in to essentially be like a mobile phone on tracks to the person who was in the house. And that individual didn't really like the idea of this robot coming into the room, so they picked it up and threw it through the front window out onto the lawn. And the robot was fine. It dusted itself off, and they drove it back in, and they're like, "Hey, we're just trying to have a chat." But they're not always received.
So that robot was quite small. If he could pick it up, and or this person could pick it up, I'm assuming it was a he, but and could throw it through the window.
That weighs about 16 kilograms, and it's designed to be portable, so to be carryable by. Not for terribly long distances, but nevertheless to be taken from a helicopter or from the back of a van or a truck or a car and deployed quite quickly.
So is it sort of rolling up there and saying, and the person is hearing one of the police voices, or is it a little robot voice going, I'm here to communicate with you?
Maybe one day. For now, it's one of the officers' voices, which is replayed through the speaker.
Michael, with all these inventions that we spoke about before under your belt, what do you like to do in your spare time when you're off the clock, so to speak?
Spare time. I remember that.
What is that?
No, this year's been a busy one. But outside of that, I do enjoy relaxing. Often involves a component of being outside one way or the other. So whether it's going for a swim or rock climbing or hiking, I really enjoy being out and about and maybe pushing the body as hard as the mind gets pushed as a nice balancing act. But it's when you're constantly thinking about your work, that's, it can be part of the process, but it's also important to be able to pull back at times and understand why you're doing what you're doing, not for the end user, but for yourself as well. And that perspective and that time to recharge is something which I schedule into my daily flow as well.
And sometimes your best ideas just sort of like float in when you're not really trying to think about them, or you're just doing something, that you really enjoy. That's when you have your best, ideas sometimes, isn't it?
I'm sure everyone, well, I'm not sure, but I suspect many people will have at least had the experience of trying to remember someone's name or the name of a song or something, and it's only when you remove focus from that it pops in your mind. And that experience is very much how ideas come to me. And it's a targeted approach, like taking a formal engineering approach to finding a solution is important, but also that, no holds barred, anything's possible mindset, whether it's at the gym or going for a walk or, diving under a wave, you can really, that freedom that the mind has is when you're not putting any limits on what's possible.
Clears a little bit of space there and allows things to come in.
It does.
Yeah, and if you could change one thing about the world of robotics to ensure a safe future, what would it be?
There's a lot that's said about this, or it's certainly in the media a lot more these days, specifically around AI and the development thereof. But in general, education is absolutely number one. Like, you could pretty much ask me any question, and I'd say the most important thing is for people to be educated about the topic. With robotics, there are so many opportunities where it can make life easier or safer or just better in whatever way for individuals. And quite often they're seen as a technology which is taking away a task, which is therefore taking away the job for an individual. And certainly that, it can be a reality at times, but I think if done in conjunction with the people who it affects in a manner which is inclusive and everyone's on board with it, you can get some really good outcomes and for everyone. In terms of the AI side of things, I'm watching that space as well. It's not something that I am particularly involved with, but nevertheless interested. I think we can only turn to some of the advice that's being given from people who are very much at the cutting edge of AI, and their words are generally slowly. Don't rush into things quite too much, and I hope we can heed that advice or warning, whichever way you want to take it.
Yes. Now, Michael, we have a fast few questions for you.
Shotgun round.
Yeah, are you ready? So just the first thing that pops into that fabulous brain of yours. And here we go. What's the best piece of advice you've been given on your path to success?
If you're not embarrassed by your product at launch, then you've launched too late. Ultimately, what it comes down to is there's always going to be an opportunity for improvement. And if you've addressed all of those on day one, you've probably spent too long getting to day one. And so the idea of just putting something out there and getting some feedback early, and it might be as a in a small group of users, and it might be a pre-release type scenario, but waiting until you're absolutely happy with every last detail of a system or product or whatever it may be before you release may not be the most efficient way to get there.
So just have a crack, basically.
Yeah.
Just get it out there. If you could recommend one book to the younger generation to get them on the right path to ensure our Earth's future, what would it be? Just one book.
I haven't written it yet. I enjoyed The Martian. That was an audiobook though. Does that count? I used to listen to it while I rode my bike around the river. That was my downtime. I enjoyed that, and so far things are going okay.
And look how you turned out, exactly. Mick, if your life was a movie, what would it be called and who would star in it?
I've got no idea what it would be called, but I think it would be Will Ferrell.
Oh, Will.
Is that even how you say his name? Farrell?
I think Will Ferrell, yeah.
What would it be called? I've got no idea what it would be called, but it would be Will Ferrell.
Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Change One Thing podcast.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to review, subscribe, and share with your friends.